Okay, so I recently watched Candace Owens being interviewed by Piers Morgan, and they discussed a variety of different topics which they disagreed with each other over and got quite argumentative, which is quite entertaining. But I wanted to talk about a few things that Candace said about the COVID vaccine, because yes, they are still going on about how terrible the COVID vaccine is all this time later. Okay, so let's have a listen.
I think you're dishonest for a lot of other reasons. So please don't harp on this one tweet. But yeah, because you flip flop on your positions the entire time. That's the reason why I tweeted those things about you. But I mean, everything. COVID, you flip-flopped on COVID. You flip-flopped on BLM. At one minute, you were supporting BLM, and then you're like, my son's out protesting. It's amazing. And then when they're burning stuff down, I don't find you to be someone that actually takes meaningful risks and says what you believe. You kind of take both positions all the time.
Well, actually, I'm not an ideologue about any of it.
So don't pretend that the first time I ever suggested you were dishonest.
I'm not an ideologue about any of these things. Right, so you want me to be an ideologue? You want me to stick to one side on everything?
No, I'm just saying that it seems like once the conversation cracks, and this is a lot of people in media, they don't take risks. They deliver the government talking points, and then they move once it kind of becomes okay to question the government. So COVID, this was the prevailing narrative. You were like, get the vaccine, If you don't do the vaccine, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden now we're finding out that, and you would have called someone like me, anti-vax, trying to kill someone, all of these things. Well, I didn't get the vaccine. My family didn't get the vaccine. And now we're on the other side of this thing, and people are like, well, maybe I had it wrong. Maybe I have some regrets.
What do you think I've expressed regrets over?
Going with the mainstream narrative in the beginning.
Don't just keep talking. What do you think I've expressed regret about with COVID?
Well, let me ask you, are you still standing by all the stuff you said about people being idiots for not getting the vaccine?
Yeah, the only thing I changed, because the scientific advice changed, and I've accepted that if there was another health pandemic, I would not rush to accept scientific advice in real time as actually 100% irrefutable, never to change, because science evolves, and especially in a health emergency. The one thing I have said I changed my mind over, because the science advice changed, was that originally they advised that if you had the vaccine, then you could not transmit the virus. And I was then very censorious towards people who simply refused to have the vaccine, because I said, it's not about you, it's actually about your ability to transmit it and maybe infect more vulnerable people. And I thought it was selfish.
Well, that's a pretty big change.
Well, hang on, let me finish.
Okay, now, the COVID vaccine, it doesn't stop people from getting COVID, but it lessens the symptoms so that the symptoms that you get are not so severe, because it builds up your immune system. I would maybe think that might mean that you're less likely to transmit the virus, because people transmit the viruses mainly through, say, like coughing and sneezing. So if your symptoms are less, then I would have thought that you don't cough and sneeze so much, so you might be slightly less likely to transmit the virus. Now, I know that the COVID vaccine did save lives. I do know that, because I work in a care home for the elderly, many of them like in their 80s and 90s, right? And the first time we had COVID in the home, that was before the vaccine came out, okay? And quite a few of the residents passed away due to COVID, okay? The second time we had COVID in the home, this is when they had all been vaccinated and none of them died, okay? All of them recovered, okay? So clearly the vaccine worked, all right? Now, obviously, when we're talking about the elderly, they are the ones that are vulnerable to viruses. It's the same with the flu, okay? The flu vaccine saves lives because the flu will kill the elderly. I'm not saying everybody who's elderly who gets it, okay? So I would have thought that people, at the very least, would say that the COVID vaccine is good for elderly people, okay? Now, if you're reasonably young, healthy, COVID is not likely to like be dangerous to you. But there have been some exceptions. There have been people that are young who, you know, didn't have any like major health problems who that COVID did affect badly, and there have been young people that have died from COVID. It's not very likely, but it does happen, okay? And I did, at the time, I did talk about this on my channel, about how my uncle passed away due to COVID, okay? And he was nearly 60, and he wasn't in bad health. He had a bit of asthma, but he wasn't like, you wouldn't have thought he'd be high risk, okay? So there are some exceptions. There was, I also remember, like, because it was on the news here in the UK, there was this guy who, he was an anti-vaxxer, and he was like posting these videos on YouTube telling people not to get the vaccine, if you get the virus, it's better to just like, you know, for your immune system to be boosted naturally. But he actually ended up dying from the virus, okay? And his wife, she didn't even know that he was posting these videos on YouTube, these videos saying don't get the vaccine, okay? So after he passed away, like, you know, she wanted to sort of use him like as a warning to say like, no, you should get the vaccine, okay? So even though like, yeah, most of the time, if you're not elderly and you're in good health, most of the time, COVID is not going to be dangerous to you, but there still are those exceptions, okay?
And I was very censorious, way too censorious. I've admitted that. Shouldn't have been so censorious. And when the science advice changed and said, actually, there's now evidence that suggests, and in fact, it looks clear, the evidence, that if you have the vaccine, it makes little difference to your ability to transmit the virus or not, then I changed my position. And when I was asked about that later, I said, absolutely. I should not have been so censorious to people who didn't have it, because at that point, it becomes personal choice. But if you ask me on the wider picture, do I think the COVID vaccines were a good thing? Absolutely. Do I think they saved millions of lives? Absolutely. Do I think the deliberate attempt to discredit all science involved in the COVID pandemic is a dangerous, dangerous thing for society? Absolutely. Do I know lots of people who died from COVID who would potentially have been saved by a vaccine if it had been there when they caught the virus? Absolutely. So do not take my one clarification about the ability of a vaccine to prevent transmission as being some great mea culpa that I think...
That's a huge mea culpa, Piers.
Well,
that's a huge mea culpa. That's a huge mea culpa. Because that means that you let people to go out and to get an experimental vaccine in their arm and encourage them not to listen to independent voices that were saying, hold on. That's a huge mea culpa. People died from the vaccine. So you're talking about people that died from not getting it. There have been scores of people who died from the vaccine. There have been scores of people like my grandfather who got the vaccine and then were dead within 1 year because it led to their dementia suddenly spreading or advancing rather in a way. Stop. I let you
you
speak about your mea culpa.
You do not know that was down to the vaccine, do you?
Okay. First and foremost, they have admitted so much. They lied about the 6 feet social distancing. That just came out 2 weeks ago. And you were on the side of all of these people. So don't pretend that that's a small mea culpa. People died from blood clots pertaining to the vaccines that you were telling them to rush out and get, okay?
People died
had they have waited and perhaps listened to independent voices who understood that there was some government... No, I let you talk about your mea culpa. Had they have paused and listened to independent voices who have, I think, probably a greater strength when it comes up to standing up to government initiatives, because we recognize that the government is not our friend, and we recognize that the government is not trying to save our lives. Maybe those people would be alive. Maybe my friends who had miscarriages and my friends who were saying that it was impacting their menstruation until the government was ready to admit that 7 months later. If you had listened to people that were telling you their own experiences, someone I know that went completely blind in one eye because of some weird ocular clots. So don't pretend that's a small thing. I just want to say, I'm happy to accept that you've changed your mind.
Let me respond.
But don't pretend it's a small thing. People died from the vaccine.
Let me respond.
And by the way, I want to be clear for people watching this. He's saying still get it. I'm saying still don't. Just so you can hear a different opinion, do not allow the government to put that in your arm.
Okay.
God's system works. The government is not fixing you in any regard.
And do you feel the same way about the flu shot?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I haven't gotten a flu shot since I was like 12.
Okay.
Okay, Candace and her husband and her children, they are young, okay? Say like Candace says she doesn't agree with the flu vaccine. It's like, all right, but when you're like 80 years old, if you get the flu then it could be dangerous, okay? Now here in the UK, we don't typically give the flu vaccine to young people, okay? It's normally the elderly or anybody like if they're at high risk, like if they've got something that makes their immune system sort of weak or something like that, okay? And again, the flu, just like COVID, is extremely dangerous to the elderly, okay? So, you know, Candace can say like, well, you know, I've never had the flu vaccine, you know, since I was 12 or whatever. It's like, well, okay, well, if you get the flu, it's not likely to be dangerous to you now. But if when you're 80, if you still like are against the vaccine, it could be dangerous to you then. Also, like saying like that people that she knew had dementia and other health problems due to the COVID vaccine, I mean, that sounds extremely like paranoid to me. Like, people have health issues all the time, or like dementia. Again, when people get older, like that is probably not anything to do with the vaccine. That's probably like, it sounds a bit paranoid, you know, like there was a few people that were saying stuff like that they thinking that like the vaccine was like causing cancer and affecting people mentally and stuff like that, and it sounds like paranoia.
I'm referring to the flu shot expose. You see, we're the ones loading them with mind-controlling additives.
But why?
To drive people into a frenzy of shopping. That's why flu shots are given just before Christmas.
Of course. It's so simple. Wait, no it's not. It's needlessly complicated.
It is true that in some rare cases, like the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, there were some, they think that there were some rare cases of blood clots. I mean, that is true. There is going to be some, you know, rare cases of people having bad side effects, okay? That will happen with any medication, any vaccine, okay? A few people have brought up, like, the COVID vaccine interfering with women's menstrual cycle. Okay, now that is a side effect that they actually were quite open about that from the beginning. That some women, like, after having the vaccine, like, found that their periods were kind of irregular, or some women had like heavier periods just for a little while, and apparently that is just because the vaccine boosts your immune system. Like it says that it's likely to be a result of your immune system's response to the vaccine, rather than, like, you know, the chemicals that are in the vaccine, okay? And it's, you know, it's not dangerous, it's just, you know, it's a vaccine. It boosts your immune system, which is a good thing. But, you know, some women it caused, you know, sort of irregular periods just after the vaccine.
And things like polio and measles and all the other shots that we give kids.
Let's skip to the point. You might not know this. I don't vax my children. They are not vaxxed. We travel the world. My children are never sick. I am proudly, as you media terms it, anti-vax. I'm very aware of the psychological wounds of coming up with names for people for making sensible decisions. I don't believe, Big Pharma is not God.
I understand.
Okay? Big Pharma is very much, in my view, getting in the way of God's designs.
I absolutely respect your right to do what you want for your children. I did the complete opposite for mine. I believe that all vaccines carry risks. By the way, paracetamol carries risks. Ibuprofen carries risks. Any medication, you will find instances of side effects and deaths. Every medication in the world that's ever been created. But do I think overall that COVID vaccines saved millions of lives and were an incredible thing done at warp speed in the middle of a desperate pandemic that was killing thousands of people every day? Absolutely, I do. So you and I will disagree about that.
You're simply wrong.
He's not simply wrong. He's simply right there.
Well, you and I
we
disagree
We're
about
never
that.
going to agree on it. Yeah,
Okay, we don't have to
100% disagree on that.
But here's the beauty: we don't have to agree about it,
That's right.
right?
But I wish that when you said you were being censorious, I wish that you would have allowed people who strongly disagreed to present their arguments at that time, because I think that a lot of people who are now struggling and getting blood clots and things of that nature, their lives could have been saved.
I don't disagree with you. I had a lot of people around me dying from COVID in the most hideous, horrendous circumstances. The co-presenter of the show, the morning show I was doing, her husband went into a coma and never really came out of it, and sadly died a few months ago after 4 years. Right? Had there been a vaccine when he got the virus in March in the first wave, he might well have lived.
Yes, that was extremely sad. That was Kate Garraway's husband. She used to be on Good Morning Britain sometimes with Piers Morgan when he was on there. And yeah, her husband, he got COVID and he was in a coma for quite some time. And then, you know, when he came round, he was like basically bedridden and needed like, you know, his wife to look after him all the time. And now, you know, unfortunately, he's passed away and he was only aged 56. Okay, and this is the thing, like people who say stuff like, oh, COVID is just like a cold, it's not serious. It's like, well, that's not true with everybody. Like, it is true that some people, they don't get symptoms very severe. But then there are other people that do get it really badly. And, you know, like I just said, there are some people who, they're not elderly, didn't have specific bad health issues, who it affected really badly when, you know, or some of them it killed, when, like, they didn't think that they were somebody who was at high risk. But also, as well, it's worth mentioning that people that do have, like, underlying health issues that could put them more at risk, some of them they don't even know, because that's true as well. Like, I mean, people can have, I mean, anybody can have like health issues that you don't even know about, something going wrong with your body that you don't even know about. Okay, so yeah, again, like, I mean, I do agree, like the COVID vaccine obviously did save lives.
And that,
yeah, I don't think the vaccine would. I personally don't believe that the vaccine would have saved him, and it's an impossible metric to know.
Because you don't think the COVID vaccine saved any lives?
I genuinely do not believe that the COVID vaccine saved any lives.
You see, I'm sorry. You're a smart person, Candace. You cannot.
Thank you.
You cannot believe that the COVID vaccines saved no lives. That is a ridiculous thing to say.
Well, I think that Candace Owens is like an example of how, like, some people can be, like, very intelligent but act stupid, if that makes any sense. You know, like, I mean, some people, like, they've obviously got good minds, probably high IQ'd, and, you know, probably, like, academic and know lots of stuff, but can still act like idiots, okay? Like saying the COVID vaccine didn't save any lives. It's like, yeah, it did. I've seen that it did. Okay, but that's all I've got to say about that for now. Thank you for listening.